All right, so who are we? Well, I'm Arun Gupta. I'm one of the principal open source technologists at Amazon. My focus particularly is on all open source technologies that are around containers. I also represent AWS on the CNCF governing board. And I let the panelists introduce themselves.
Sure. Oops. Hi, everybody. Is it on?
The mic is not on. The handheld is not on here.
Like that?
No.
Mic. Oh, this one works. Hi.
Okay. Is it better? Oh, yeah, that works.
Okay.
So, hi, everybody. I'm Patrick Chanezon from Docker. I'm Chief Developer Advocate at Docker. I've been involved in the creation of OCI with Chris here. I'm also representative of Docker at the CNCF, technical oversight, or at the CNCF board with Arun and Chris. That's it.
My name is Chris Aniszczyk. I serve as CEO for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. As Patrick mentioned, we were involved with the kind of creation of the Open Container Initiative, or otherwise known as OCI, where I serve as executive director there, and I'm involved with a bunch of other kind of Linux Foundation efforts. Been involved in open source for a long time, from Linux-related things to JVM to, I guess, cloud native things these days.
Cool. I'm Chris Nova. I work at Heptio. I do a ton of open source work in the Kubernetes space. Done some work around Docker, contribute to Go, write a lot of Go. I wrote a book. Apparently I'm important, I don't know.
All right, so let me start with the low ball first, okay? What is one word that would define you as a person? And what do you think is one word that would define the state of containers today? So Chris, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so one word to define me, I would say adventure. I'm super into adventures, both in tech and in like real life. And then one word to define containers, I would say, don't hate me on this one, but I would say hard, particularly because every person I talk to, like the first thing is like, okay, I have to go through this exercise of learning what is a container and how to use it and like all the stuff that comes with it. So I think that's a good word.
Okay.
Cool. So one word to describe me, maybe to continue with Chris's adventure theme, wanderlust. Just before this panel, I'm kind of lucky to do a bunch of travel. So I checked my trip data, and I visited 65 countries in the last something like eight years. And so my goal is to do 100. And I think the wanderlust not only applies to just travel. It's I've been fortunate to work with a bunch of different open source communities, and one of the best things about open source is it exposes you to people from all over, different types of technologies, and so it's something that's always something that I've enjoyed. So in terms of word to describe containers, we were joking about this earlier, but I'm going to go out and say it's getting a little bit more boring, and boring in a sense where things are maturing. I think containers are.
That's my
You took his word.
I thought your word was going to be Docker, but I think containers are becoming more mature, and will be less kind of. You're basically, containers will just be there, and you're going to be focusing on stuff on top of it.
Wow, pretty good. So a word for myself, it would be curious. I always want to learn new stuff, and in my career I moved from company to company to learn new things. And to talk about the container world, I had the same word, maturing. A few years ago, when we all started playing with containers, a lot of the talks at these conferences were about what is the technology, how you can use it. And today, a lot of the talks that I see that are the most interesting at conferences, especially conferences like this, is more about how do people use it to create value. And I think right now we're at the phase where the technology has matured a lot. As Chris said, there are still some things that are hard to do, but it's getting easier and easier. And right now, the focus is really on sharing experience between practitioners about how they create value out of it.
Yeah, I think I agree. If there is definitely a lot of work that we need to do to educate people on the value of containers. I agree it is hard. I agree it's maturing as well. But there is still, a lot of times we visit the customers. It's like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Is containers your golden hammer that you want to solve it with? So I think that's the key part that we want to understand and help our customers understand. That's a very important part. Now, on a personal level, the word that describes me is passion. I think life is too boring, if there is no passion in it. So whatever I do, whether it's work, whether it's my personal life, I do a lot of running. I do run for passion. I do a lot of open source work. That's for passion. That's the reason I came to AWS, particularly in the open source team. So I think that's super exciting to me. That's what describes me. And the way I look at the state of containers today, if I were to use one word, I would say enabler. There were so many issues before containers where I've been into multiple fights between Java EE versus Spring, and those fights will go on forever, But the point is, and Patrick and I used to fight, but now we have a common language to talk. In the sense, the discussions have gone at a level where we're saying, let's do what you want to do. Let's enable you at a container level. Now, you have a container level. Now, let's take that as a base layer, and that's a given. So I think that's what I feel excited about, because it really allows you to package your applications together at one artifact, and let's run with it. So that's how I see it. Very cool. Okay. We have had open source for a while. And next year, essentially, we're going to be doing the 20th anniversary of open source. OSCON, OSI are planning big celebrations around it. Was there and there are few technologies that have been driven by open source. But if you look at the container industry today, that is heavily driven by open source. And maybe part of the blame, so to say, goes to Docker, because that's sort of their genesis. It started from open source. So tell me why open source is so relevant in the container industry.
So my perspective on that is containers have existed since a long time. As many of us know, they were used in lots of different places, but they were hard to use. There's been the genius of Solomon for design when he put together a union file system with C groups and namespaces in an easy-to-use user interface. So that was the original Docker from 4 years ago. But the thing is, Docker evolved with the community. It was built with the whole community, and the whole industry rallied around it. So Docker was really built by all of us. And it went to a point when a few years ago we said, hey, this is becoming so important. Lots of companies are betting their future strategy on it. We need to have some standards around it. And so we created OCI with a lot of the industry partners in there. And then later on, we created the CNCF for lots of the different components. Right now, we had a lot of effort into componentizing Docker into different components so that people can build their own thing with them. So it's the Moby project. So I'd say with projects like all the projects in CNCF plus the projects in Moby, we see a lot of innovation in the container space, and then each one of us as companies productize that in a different way.
Why open source? Why open source matters in the container life? We have lived through the Death Star and all those protocols. I've been into WSI, W3C standard bodies, which was completely closed source. Why open source matters here? I think that's the part I want to understand.
I can try to answer that. So I think if you look at it on a technical level, like what is a container and how do containers work? Like implicitly, you're going to be dealing with a lot of other open source tools, right? So like if you look at like a container, like it's a system process that's like really hyped up. And in most cases, that's a Linux system process, right? Linux is open source. And when we were going through the exercise of trying to port Docker to FreeBSD, most of my work was just like reading FreeBSD man pages, and that's all open source. So I mean, to take an already open source idea and extend it and make that closed source is frankly kind of backwards.
Yeah.
Open source as one is probably the dominant kind of collaborative model for you to basically work together with a bunch of different companies who compete at some level, but at least you decide here's some base set of code that we agree is kind of the common thing we don't want to compete on. That model has just basically won out. So I don't think you could out-innovate what you could do in open source land.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the part of the fact also is the collaboration, as Chris, you pointed out, is a lot easier. So you have been involved, particularly on your side, you started your career in the open source field. So you want to elaborate a little bit on that, what got you excited about this part of it?
About containers in general?
Containers and open source, and how you have been building ecosystem around open source, yeah.
So open source has always been special to me because that's really how I learned, right? Like, no, I didn't really have a formal training. I was kicked out of college for hacking. So like the open source community was like very much my bread and butter growing up as a software engineer. And so I've taken that idea and really implemented it in like to all aspects of my life. Like I put that in like relationships with my family members and everywhere else. So to me, when I like look at an open source project, it represents so much more than just like an Apache 2 license, for instance. It's like this idea, and it's like there's this community and this like sort of scientific approach of like, I'm gonna fail publicly and that's okay. In fact, we're gonna encourage that. So in my career, like it's everywhere else in my life, like I very much agree that that's something I want to like strive for and encourage.
That is pretty cool. We do a lot of technology workshops for kids around the world. I run a nonprofit, and there, we talk to kids. Let's hack Scratch, for example, which is open source, and they ask us, "What do you mean by open source?" We don't want to get them bogged down by the details of Apache 2 license and all. My son, who's a high schooler, he says, open source means source code is out in the web, on GitHub somewhere, and the thing doesn't work. I will clone the repo, I'll fix it, and I will send a pull request, and I'm done. And that's the attitude that we want to see this, and I think that's where you are coming from as well.
Absolutely, and I think it's important to say, like, and I tweeted about this the other day, like, there's a big difference between having an open source mentality and an open source community, and then also having public source code that only you contribute to. So to me, open source is this idea of we will share everything from architectural decisions and technical decisions, and even just like, what do we want the project to look and feel like, or even solve. It's a community effort and not just like a single person or a single entity.
And sharing is absolutely caring.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Now, let me ask another question. So let's take a twist on that, if I can get my bone back. Thank you. All right, I wanted to throw a bone to these guys. Anyway, so there's a GitHub repo sitting over there. Yeah, cool. You can clone the repo. I can run a single node cluster. Our customers want to see high availability. Our customers want to see reliability. Our customers want to see scalability. How do you strike the balance, essentially, between usability and depth and SLA and visibility? What is the value provided by a vendor, essentially, to those open source projects? How do you strike the balance, basically, between contribution and to your customers?
Yeah, so I can start on this one.
Yeah.
So what you just described is the basis of Docker's business model. So we're innovating in the open and I'd say collaborating with all our competitors on the common open source code base with all these components. But when you want to run your containers in production, you need to have like certification for the underlying infrastructure, certification of containers. You have to have monitoring, logging, networking, storage, all that stuff all set up and validated. And that's what we're selling with Docker Enterprise Edition. So we collaborate with everybody, including our competitors, on the open source bits. And then we build higher level value with the Enterprise Edition.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see this pattern a lot in Kubernetes too, and I'll let you talk in a second, I promise. I know I've been talking a lot. Where it's like the community sort of defines the implementation of what the technology needs to implement, and then the vendor comes in and sort of gets to have their opinionated implementation in that sense. Anyway, go for it, Chris.
I mean, in open source, vendors basically make their money via generally like a packaging play or some maybe like additional features depending if it's like an open core play. But Docker I think is a great example of packaging up a variety of different components and making it easy to use, and people gladly pay for it. One interesting thing we're seeing in CNCF is I'm sure some of you have come across that lovely kind of landscape diagram that we've kind of developed, right? It's good and bad. Like people love it and hate it, but I guess I'm kind of doing Gartner's job for them. But in essence, like the whole point of that is to show that there are different approaches, open and closed, for different aspects of cloud native, right? It's up to vendors and folks to take those pieces a la carte and package them up into something useful that people want to pay for. And I think that's the role of kind of vendors in at least our kind of ecosystem.
Yeah, and if I were to give a little bit of an AWS perspective over there, I mean, Kubernetes existed, it has been existing for 3 years. when we started ECS, essentially the reason we started is because our customers were asking us, give us a solution to build something with Docker. Kubernetes was too early in the cycle for us to take mainstream, so we started building ECS. Our customers loved it. If you remember the slide that Andy showed this morning on the keynote, there were like 150 odd customers that are using ECS very actively. But now, as customers have asked us, okay, what Kubernetes matters to us, this morning we announced EKS. That doesn't mean EKS and ECS are competing services, but it's about offering a choice to the customer. And then the main goal of EKS, again, is to do 100% upstream experience so that we don't want to build anything proprietary, closed source. We're going to keep contributing it to upstream so that in case you want to do your own EKS, yeah, sure, take the upstream build, run it, and then where AWS excels is from the reliability, scalability, high availability, the usual traits that you're expected out of AWS, essentially. So Chris, I have a question for you, essentially, now. And maybe for Patrick as well. The idea is, if you look at the Moby, Project Moby, or if you look at the CNCF landscape, there are about 14 projects today, a lot more in the pipeline that are going to get integrated. If you look at the stack diagram, my head starts spinning. I really have to take put a big chart on like on a 10 by 10 feet wall. What is the stack that I'm going to use now? Now, what are we telling our customers? How are we guiding our customers? What is it that they should use? What components are going to work with each other? What sort of certifications are we offering to our customers to make that a little bit easier to consume?
Yeah, so I'll start. I kind of spoke on this a little bit. So, the whole purpose of that landscape was to demonstrate that there's multiple paths to cloud native. There's just not one set of technologies. Like, yes, we think that, the projects in CNCF are good, solid, proven options with healthy communities, but there's other open and even closed options that people are using. So it kind of reflects, I think, the reality of things. Other things that we essentially do is we've launched some efforts around training, certification. So we have a Kubernetes certification program that we've launched. So we had something like 36, or actually more than that now, but 36 certified Kubernetes distros that basically offer some level of guarantee that these things are compatible and work across the different distros. So
and my perspective on that is that on the open source side, you have an explosion, really a Cambrian explosion of projects. There are lots of projects for everything you want to do, and you can see that in the CNCF eye chart. You can see that in the Moby project as well. We have tons of projects in there. And the reason we're doing them, for us, it's for systems builders, like things like LinuxKit or InfraKit or Containerd. They are really for people who are building their own platforms. Now, for customers who just want to run containers, that's where we assemble all these things together into our commercial products. For example, recently we just added Kubernetes in there, and we're constantly adding new components in there in a packaged way so that they have an easy way to consume all that.
Okay, well, makes sense. So now this panel is about, of course, open source and containers. And typically when you are applying, you're deploying your applications to a cloud, say this is a land of lock-in. So help me understand, is there a future for, say, a closed source software, particularly in the container land?
Going back to that landscape, you look at it, I would actually argue more than half of it is there's closed software there. There's plenty of great proprietary options that you could use. And honestly, if you look at the market, customers use a variety. Some customers, depending how advanced they are, may be using more proprietary options than not. Others are using a mix of open source, closed options, and so on. I think it just reflects the reality of the market. So.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. A lot of our customers are using Docker for what we call modernization of traditional apps. So typically these are like Windows .NET apps. Like .NET is open source now, but yeah, we have mainframe applications as well, WebLogic applications, so Oracle databases. So in the kind of workloads that are going to run in containers, there are tons of proprietary software. And I think both of them can coexist in there.
Yeah, I think both are sort of necessary evils to the other one. And I think, we all need jobs. We all have to approach this from a business and marketing perspective. And if closed source is the right thing for the right time, then I absolutely think it's a necessary thing for this industry. I mean, if you look at tools like Netflix, right? I've never seen the Netflix source code, but I pay for it every night. So it's one of the things that could totally be there. It makes sense.
Right. And again, if I think from the Amazon perspective, we have ECS, which is the closed source. Parts of it are open source. So like the ECS agent, there's the ECS CLI. We are looking at blocks and how we can have an open source scheduler built as part of blocks. So parts of it are open source. So we're giving hooks for our customers to be able to contribute to it. But then you look at EKS, which is fully based on an open source community. So I mean, in my opinion, it's non-controversial. We seem to all agree that there is a future for closed source. It's not the only open source alternative.
I mean, sometimes the challenge for closed source stuff, though, is open source does act kind of as a natural commoditization engine, right? So sometimes people will take something that's closed source, they're not happy with the specific thing, build an open source solution. So over time, we just see this repeat itself in the industry. So.
Also, I think going with open sources can sometimes be lower of a risk from a business perspective. If you take a gamble on closed source software and for whatever reason it doesn't work out, you have to run the risk and the return on that.
Yeah. It depends on the company too.
Yeah.
So this used to be a frequent conversation between myself and Stephen Wally when he was working at Docker. He's at Microsoft now. He gave some talks at the Linux Foundation events called Open Source is not a business model. And his argument is that open source is a great production model. So that's a way to collaborate and build software, but then the way to monetize it is through subscriptions and things like that. Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to add is talking about lock-in for Amazon. Actually, that's exactly where we see our value proposition to our customers. What we provide them is software that runs on top of Amazon, Azure, Google, and in their data center that gives them some portability without getting locked in.
All right. Well, last question, and before I open it up to the audience, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. If we look at the lay of the land, how it was 10 years ago, people were still building Spring Boot applications. You have, not Spring Boot, but traditional Spring applications. Yeah, JEE, well, Java EE. I should be politically correct. Java EE, or J2EE applications, EJBs. I'm going through a painful time. And if we look at the lay of the land today, it's we are up-leveling ourselves. Those applications are still built, but talking at a containers level. How do you think the application landscape could possibly look like 10 years from now? And Docker to me was sort of the tipping point for the application infrastructure. I mean, a lot of people have been doing containers for a while, but Docker, as you said, Solomon kind of commoditized it. And then you say, okay, you know what? Now everybody can do this. What do we think is going to be the next tipping point or the application building could look like in the years to come?
You can take it if you want.
Okay, so I have some ideas on that, and actually it resonates with Andy's keynote this morning, when he talked about machine learning. To me, the next stage is when machines are going to read a lot of code and learn to write code for us, so that we can work at a higher level of abstraction. My whole career has always been about getting to a higher level of abstraction to build more useful stuff with less, letting the machine do more work for us. There are some companies like SourceD who are reading all the code on GitHub and trying to build machine learning models. At the end of the day, maybe it will be I provide inputs and outputs and the machine will write a program, or maybe I will talk to it, or maybe I will write. So the software developer role will more become like a writer or a painter, or maybe a theater player. Maybe I will do some acting, and the computer will learn what I want to do with all this data.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's a user versus builder. And that line is kind of a bit fuzzy these days.
Yeah, and it should get more and more fuzzy. I think everybody will become a builder, but the tools for building should be easier to use. And actually at Docker, our mission statement is to build tools of mass innovation. So,
One of the things I think about a lot, and this just might be me like too late at night or whatever, I think we're going to get to a point one day as a species where we actually stop writing code and we skip that step and we go directly from software to other software, and the whole intermediate part of actually representing and encapsulating software in a human readable form won't really be necessary. And sometimes I think about like what that would be like if we were to write like binary code that would just spit out another bit of binary, and the humans were just sitting there massaging all these little executables to make them do what we wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, I spent about almost like a decade of my life building developer tooling, and honestly, the stuff that we use today, kind of to reflect on Patrick's point, it's still pretty primitive. Like, it doesn't really take advantage of the kind of availability of like AI and machine learning stuff that you could like imagine that being imprinted into your like IDE or development environment. That's just not there yet. So I'm hoping in the next decade our development experience is a lot smarter than kind of just straight up like them Emacs and basic IDE. So
don't hit on Emacs now.
Yeah, Emacs needs AI.
That's the quote right there. That's the quote that needs to get tweeted.
I use it when there's a Vim plugin.
Oh, there you go.
Well, I think if we go back 10 years ago, I don't think any one of us would have predicted that the containers would be the next big thing. So I think any prediction that we make at this point of time is probably short-lived. Somebody will come up, with a machine learning way of writing code, and there you are in 2 years. That is all implemented. So to me, the way I look at it is, it's a constant evolution. To me, 10 years look out so far out, I can't even think that long. I don't know what I'm going to be doing. But essentially, to me, the way I look at it is building that upscale components, upstack components. That how do I dumb it down further and further and further so that I can do more interesting things? Because how many of you have seen the movie Matrix? Never let the humans do the job of a machine, as Patrick was saying. So let the machines do. Let the GPUs, let your compute instances do all the hard work so that you can focus on the fun thing. That's sort of my belief, at least. Well, those are all my questions. So at this point of time, I would like to kind of open it up to the audience and see if you have any questions. Well, let me run around with the mic.
Mic floating around somewhere.
Well, we're getting recorded, so I'm going to take this off my head. It's kind of hurting.
What values and successes have you seen of companies that offer proprietary or closed source products that consider taking them open source?
So I think the question was, what value have we seen in companies that have taken proprietary or closed source products and moving them over to open source?
Yeah, so I have a very clear example, and one of them is Microsoft. If you're looking at what Microsoft has been doing in the past few years, it's amazing the number of stuff they're open sourced. The bigger one I would say is .NET, and the value they're getting out of it is their new business model is Azure. They want all the workloads in Azure, including Linux. They know that lots of developers are developing on Linux and on Macs, and if they want these people to use .NET, they needed .NET to run there, and so they decided to open source it. And I think it was a very smart decision. .NET is living a renaissance thanks to that now.
I'll give a slightly dated example. Back in 2005, I was at Sun Microsystems. We used to have this Sun 1 application server or Netscape application server. It was fully closed source. Patrick was one of the culprits
I worked on that.
Yeah, so Patrick and I were together at that point of time. We took that Netscape application server from closed source. We announced that 2005 Java 1, we're going to take it open source. And 2006, we released the source code. And from there, literally, from like a few downloads, from 0 to, we reached 5 million downloads in 3 years. So a lot of it was perspective as well. It was literally a top-down derivative that, okay, it has to be open source and everything has to be laid out. So downloads, much wider visibility. We are building this brand new workshop, which is Kubernetes on AWS workshop. We are working very actively with our customers, our partners, and we're going to start reaching out to them more actively. Literally this morning, somebody sent me a pull request with a typo. And every typo really improves the value of the software. And whereas I might have missed that typo. So I think that contribution, that community-powered innovation that you see in your software is just immense. And similarly, again, We're looking at blocks, for example. We're building a daemon set scheduler over there out in the open source, but we're hoping our customers will be able to contribute more to it as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, just echoing what you said, Arun, I think there's something to be said about when you open source software for you kind of want to, like, you have higher expectations than you would for yourself. When I had originally started Cubicorn, I had it closed source and I released it at GopherCon. And I remember having horrible anxiety the night before, but I was getting ready to show it to people, like, worried about things like typos or like what is the user experience going to be like for them. And the second I clicked that open source button, everybody started like contributing and they had comments and people were opening PRs to fix like typos in their docs. And I mean, sure, it was embarrassing, but overall it ultimately led to a better product.
Well, I mean, I'll share an internal story. In the sense that our team was saying, oh, you release this out in the public, what do you mean? There are typos in it. I said, but that's the beauty of open source. I mean, it's okay, because the product is pretty solid, the lab is building, we're evolving with the community. It's completely okay to be transparent. So that's how we are evolving it. I think that's the big value that I see in it, personally.
I wanted to add a few examples. So one example was when Google created OpenSocial with 15 different social networks back in 2007. When we did that, we open sourced the core component that would, the server that would enable all the social networks to implement OpenSocial. It was the Apache Shindig project. And when we did that, a few of them implemented it. But then very quickly, Facebook killed all the other social networks, and there was no value in there at all anymore. And so it was an effort to try to use open source as a strategic weapon to get some value out of it, but it failed. So that's one example when it failed. And I have another...
You mean Google has that Google Social, Google Plus thing, right?
Oh, it was before Google Plus.
Oh, okay, before that.
Google Plus was the second failure in social networking from Google.
I didn't say that.
I was involved only in the first one. The other example I had is when Netscape was bought by AOL and open sourced Mozilla. At that time, AOL bought Netscape for the eyeballs in NetCenter. They didn't care at all either about the server side that went to Sun or about the browser that they put into a foundation. And then a few years later, with the Firefox project, it became very successful. And then Google invented that business model based on ads, and browsers suddenly became like a huge source of revenue. And I think Netscape or Firefox was doing 100 million in revenue thanks to Google at that time. And so that's an opportunity of where they open source something, but they didn't know what value would come out of it.
Oh, let me take this around. Do we have another handheld that I can run around with the audience?
This question is for Chris. With all this stuff that's been announced today, kind of what are your thoughts on what's not going to happen, but where people are going, like with COPS, right? Because my team has spent like a lot of time using COPS and working with it, and we love it, and it's awesome. And now with all the stuff that AWS is doing, kind of where do you think you'll continue to have people that'll just keep on trucking with COPS, or maybe migrate to some of to EKS and things like that?
I think it's going to be this really awesome hybrid collaboration between AWS and open source. And like, even if you go to the SIG cluster lifecycle meetings, we've talked about pulling parts of COPS into a library and using that in like various different ways. Like we've even talked about taking it and running it as a controller, like in a container in Kubernetes itself. So I think like the code in COPS is great. It does a lot of great things, and I think we're going to continue to see it evolve moving forward. It just might come in a new guise, and then a lot of that might come from help with our friends at Amazon.
And let me take a shot at it as well. I mean, if you think about this, yes, EKS, we have announced limited preview today. We're going to start onboarding customers in the next few weeks. The GA is not going to be until HA 2018. And with EKS, we will take an opinionated approach in the sense, okay, this is how we're going to run the master. We hope that works for everybody, but that may not work for everybody. So you do need that custom way of doing things. And if you look at the way we have built the workshop today, it is entirely based on COPS today. So essentially the way I look at the workshop, for example, evolving is, hey, we expect you to run a 3-master, 5-worker cluster. You could do this using COPS. You could do this using CloudFormation. You could do this using Terraform. You could do this using EKS. It doesn't really matter to us because the service by itself is going to be very lean. A lot of it is all about the Kubernetes concepts. So I think that's the way I look at it.
in general, the managed services, right, run by AWS, we know RDS, we know some other things. EFS took 1.5 years from preview to GA. And Kubernetes, I think, is more complex than EFS by comparison. There's so many components like, networking, all the layers. How long do you think it would really come out of preview into production quality?
So this morning we said EKS is going to be GA first half of 2018. That's what we're looking at. So we're going to start onboarding customers, soon. We're hoping in the next few weeks. I've been able to build a EKS cluster, so it is the working code that we're looking at right now. It's not like something shim that we're looking at it. So hopefully start onboarding customers on a limited preview, and then do a GA sometime in first half of 2018. Then it'll be accessible to everybody. So we understand the pace with which Kubernetes community moves. One of the things that I talked about, one of the core tenets of EKS service is also 100% upstream compatibility. So we're going to hire people. We would like you to build your Kubernetes career working in open source at Amazon.
What is the pricing model? Are you not allowed to talk about it?
The pricing model is a TBD, both for EKS, because essentially when you ask us to provision a highly available control plane, that's what we're going to give. And as part of that, depending upon your region, you will have 3 masters and etcd. So we're running like 6 instances for you in the backend. So the pricing model is still being worked upon. And then when we get into the Fargate mode of it, which was again talked about this morning, that pricing is a TBD as well.
GKE is free.
Oh my God, she's so good.
Right. They just announced it.
Well, we don't talk about competitors in the panels.
Repeat the question.
So you ask me, at a beer, then I can answer that question. You're throwing me a bone. I have a bone already. Any other questions around, in general, about Amazon? Well, I want to introduce Zahida as well. Zahida, give us a second here. So Zahida heads the open source strategy at Amazon. So why don't you join us on the panel? If you have any questions around open source, Amazon, containers, let us know.
Hi, I'm Yaron. We spoke about open source, and you said that open source avoid locks in. I don't agree with that statement, because I think if a small company develops some open source, you took it, you're not going to maintain it. I think a higher importance is on open APIs, where as a community, we have sort of common APIs around, and that's what we're doing in CNCF with CNI, CSI, with the serverless community. So what do you think about open APIs, or open APIs versus open source importance? And the second, in terms of Amazon contribution to open APIs, which has 2 folds. One is in terms of the licensing model of APIs, because right now they're all covered with copyright laws and a bunch of things that people sort of hack around. We don't want to get to the Oracle and the situation with Google. And second is what are you going to be proactive in participating in the communities and addressing open APIs?
I think she's getting ready to answer the question.
See, I challenged you a bit.
Me? Yeah. Okay, let me see if I got that question. So, open APIs and around licensing, that's a big part of it. One of the pieces that you're asking.
Yeah, so again, there are 2 aspects to open APIs. One is, you're a market leader in certain aspects. You have Lambda, you have other APIs. One approach that we sort of as user would expect is to make sure that people can use those APIs without being, liable to all sorts of issues. Second is participating with the community in sort of standardizing APIs and bringing your opinions, which probably are valuable, into the community.
So maybe you can answer the first one, I can answer the second one. I have some perspective on that.
Okay. Do you want to get this?
No, yeah, sure. Well,
Let her time.
talk about open events, for example. You're aware of that. So open events is one of the efforts that's happening in the CNCF serverless working group, where we're trying to define an open event format for how it would work on the Lambda functions.
You guys haven't participated in that.
Well, I have been participating, Chris Munns have been participating, so I think your statement is inaccurate in that sense. Because we have been participating, we have reviewed the paper, we were at the last events group meeting, we will be at the CNCF working group meeting as well.
It depends how you define participation.
Yes.
So you want to answer the first part, how we're going to be contributing, how
Sure.
the licensing part of it?
Yeah, sure. And I think over the years as an organization, we've been contributing to open source, and what you haven't seen is that we haven't been talking about it. So since about 2005, we've made contributions to a lot of external open source projects and to our own repos. And actually, you can go and search through AWS repos and Amazon repos. If you go to aws.github.io, there's an easy way to go through and look at all of the code. And a lot of the licensing that we're working on, so as we're making acquisitions and even just looking at our own processes that we've gone through recently as well, is moving to much more permissive licenses and transitioning. So for example, even with FreeRTOS as well, there was a license that was created by the founder that was a modified version of the MIT license, and that's now been transitioned over to the proper MIT license and a permissive license as well. So we're moving to more popular licenses that's opening it up to contributions and much more friendly for the community to participate in.
I think it's not just in the context of your open source or not. I think it's pretty legitimate to have commercial products, but I think it will be more friendly if the licensing around those APIs of the commercial products are a little more permissive, That if someone says, because Amazon is a market leader, I want to create an EC2-like API, he knows that you cannot sue him tomorrow because he's done that for his personal use because he wants to use multi-cloud, for example.
Yeah, we'll take that feedback.
Next question.
This is quite echoey.
Yeah.
You have a question?
Down here.
Oh. No, I don't.
Okay.
All right. So kind of asking something slightly different, and it's really for, you folks work with containers, Amazon, all those kind of things. But you mentioned J2E or Java Enterprise, and I cannot stop thinking that in some university around the world, we still teach kids or young people this crap. And honestly, so I wanted to understand what's the role of companies like Amazon or CNCF or us as individuals into trying to, play a role actually also in the education, try to bring those technologies to young people to actually be better professionals in the future. It's a tough one.
I mean, I could at least speak from a CNCF and Linux Foundation perspective. We offer a ton of free, training and courses out there from all different types of, not only just hey, here's a free intro to Kubernetes, but we have for different languages and so on. So we're trying to do our part. The problem is each, for younger folks, if we talk at the academic university level, each curriculum is different. Each program is different, right? I started, what the hell? It was a mix of Lisp and C when I started. So it was a mix of everyone has different techniques to kind of learn and introduce folks to programming at academic level. So from the LF part, we're doing our best in terms of providing free training as much as possible. We also try to partner with universities to expose students to open source, which we still kind of see as a sour point. No one really teaches you how to contribute. You kind of have to go stumble along and learn on your own. I started my days in open source contributing to Slack and Gentoo, but way back in the day, about 18 years ago. So, things have changed.
Also, I just want to say that like I think there's a part that we can all play in that, right? Like we all know kids, we all know people who are learning, we all know people who are like mid-career and they're making a career switch, and like there's something to be said about saying like, hey, you should try to run Linux on the desktop, or like, hey, you should get into like Go or Kubernetes, or prescribe whatever you want, but just encouraging people around you and sharing the lessons you've learned is important.
Also, like, I mean, shit, back in the day, like, we had, like, what, like, Usenet and IRC, maybe? Like, kids have, like, Minecraft, YouTube, like, there's so much resources these days, like, it's out of control.
Yeah, I think there are, actually, it's not on.
Take that one.
Oh.
So there's some interesting programs out there as well. And I was formerly with the Google Open Source Program Office, and we set up Summer of Code, which encourages interns to participate. But, you know, even at an individual level, I think the university is really the, you know, a lot of the courses that are available are very much kind of still old school technologies. They're not what we're all using here in the cloud. And I think there's a lot that can be done in terms of connecting with your alumni and encouraging participation and getting students to volunteer. Because one of the things we learned through the programs that we ran like Summer of Code, is the skills that students that they learn participating in open source. At college, that's not how you're taught. You know, you kind of are focused on delivering your coursework. You're not working in a collaborative environment with peer reviews and learning from that process of communicating. So there's a lot to be said for getting people to participate and volunteer in the projects that you're building that are open.
So a couple of points I want to make. You said they're still teaching their crap in the university. Yes, they are. I wouldn't call it crap, though. I was responsible for Java EE platform back at Oracle. So no personal offense. The key point being, you can't have a container. Container is the next level of abstraction. You still need that application to be built first, right? So that's level one. Hold on. So that's the first level. Now, I found out this morning, you know, I was sitting in the keynote, I was sitting right next to my colleague. This guy is an education solution architect. His role is only to work with universities across the world, and there are many more like that. Amazon is a big company. There are many more like him that work across the world. And then he was interested. Hey, what do you do? I said, I do this container thing. What is this container thing? I said, how can I bring that to universities? So I think it's not if, it's when. I think that's how I see it. So now that, you know, everybody, you know, every time we go, you know, Zahid and I walk around Amazon, we're like, oh, what do you do at CNCF? So more and more, you know, we get involved, particularly from Amazon perspective. These education solution architects I see playing a key role, because that is exactly how they are paid. That's one. Second point I want to say is, my son got into Minecraft hacking about 4.5 years ago. He came to me one day, Dad, my jar is broken. I said, how do you know what a jar is? Oh, it's a Java program. It's like, oh, you mean that jar is broken? And I'm a Java evangelist, so of course. So I got him introduced to the concept of, you know, yeah, it's okay to hack the code and break it and rip apart the jar, put a new class file in there and see how it works. But then he got all excited. And then I got him the real thing, you know, then he fired up his Eclipse. So about 3 years ago, well, 3 years ago, he gave a keynote at Java 1 talking about how pigs fly, because that's the mod that he built. So, and that's the reason we started this workshop. So essentially the idea is we want to make sure the kids understand the basic concept. And then from Java 1, that's where the interest developed for him. Last year at DockerCon, he gave a presentation on a project called as MobiCraft, because he was aware of Minecraft well. And I'm a Docker captain, so I would do all the Docker things all the time. He would ask me like, Dad, what is Docker? And there you go, going to school, coming from school, going to grocery, we are having that discussion. And my son really built a simple mod to manage your Docker containers from Minecraft. And then that led to his talk at DockerCon. So a lot of cool things. I think, as Chris said, you know, it's upon us to give that opportunity to tickle that interest in our kid. And don't get disappointed if your kid doesn't get excited about it. Not all the kids are like that. So that's the important thing to understand. And in my case, I have never poked him to do this hard enough, but hey, he's coming to me. I'm his dad, so it's my responsibility to work with him. And in the nonprofit, we work with a lot of kids. In the last, I would say, 3.5 years or so, actually 4 years now, we have reached out to over 5,000 kids. And we start with basic concepts like, you know what? Let's do a fruit ninja using Scratch, and then see how far you go. Yeah, we have time, no worries.
Oh, great. Good. Is this? Yeah, this thing's on. Good. Hey, Lee Calcode, Docker Captain, Cloud Native Ambassador. Spent a lot of time with all of the folks up here. Got maybe two things to say, just really quick to add to that. I was, I think more to Chris's point, I was, so I'm in Austin, Texas, so I'll see some of you next week, hopefully at KubeCon. But I was guest lecturing at UT Austin a couple of weeks ago on Docker networking, as it turns out. And this is, I was going to say the kids in the class, and that's just a sign of my age at this point, but that's too bad. Anyway, the kids in the class were quite excited about learning those things, and I have to give credit to the university professor there. It was his first semester teaching a virtualization course, and had invited in quite a few external speakers, and I think that it was kudos to him and his forethought about trying to bring in some of that, so that was good. But the second thing I wanted to ask was maybe more towards Zahida, if I'm not slaughtering. But just super excited about the role that Arun, Adrian, and you are playing. Just with respect to open source, I think, I don't know if others share the sentiment, but I'll sheepishly say that my sense of AWS's taking versus giving has been maybe slanted towards the former versus the latter, and I think that's an uninformed perspective. It's just my perceived sentiment towards how it is that open source is used and maybe sold back as a service. So I'm probably undereducated in that regard, and you guys will help educate there. But most notably seeing a significant change in terms of that giving back and in terms of opening things up. And I guess the question therein that I was trying to ask is, so my full-time role is at a company, SolarWinds, headquartered in Austin, Texas. Lots of money that has been made on closed source and really trying to open up their minds and their perspectives to being much more open. Sometimes that's source code, sometimes that's just community engagement. But where part of our struggle lies is that folks that have been there a long time are very comfortable with how to monetize closed source. And so the question is, as you're opening up various aspects of the efforts that you're doing, maybe looking in arrears towards older services that, if I can use old and AWS in the same sentence, but older services that are there, can you characterize or kind of describe the decision factors that might be involved in either coming back and opening up some of those other services, and how you guys think about that?
So I don't know if one of the things that's core to Amazon and AWS is our leadership principles. And we have one that's about customer obsession.
14 of them, yeah.
Yeah, and customer obsession is a big one. It's customer obsession, and it's the customers and the requirements from the customers that's driving what we're doing in open source. So, if there are particular requests that you have, we're listening. And that's really what's driving a lot of the decision making. So, I don't know if that answers your question.
So, let me give a couple of more perspective over there. So, if you look at SAM Local, for example, SAM Local allows you to run, test dev lambdas on your laptop. That's again done fully in open source. And the person who's the lead author for SAM Local, I had dinner with him 2 days before the project was going live. He was having jitters because that's not a typical Amazon model. So literally 2 hours were just calming him down that, if your doc has a bug, it's okay. The bar that we set internally for ourselves is far too high because our customers expect that of us. So now that is how the cultural change that Zahida and I are saying, that it's okay, if things are not 101% right, let's get them out, let's get the feedback and work collaboratively with the community. Sometimes when you expose yourself, community acknowledges it and then they, be more transparent with you. So that's one example. Second is, I would say EKS again, that's one of the core tenet, as I highlighted, is going to be 100% compatible. So if I take specific examples in EKS itself, if you look at kubectl today, the way you deploy applications, kubectl has no integration with IAM. And the way you invoke kubectl, you have to smuggle your credentials out of the cluster, and then you have to use your IAM roles. These are two disconnected models. So we're working, for example, with Heptio Labs, essentially, and Chris is going to be very actively involved with that, of building an authenticator. That authenticator is going to allow you to stick your IAM role right into kubectl itself. Now, our goal is we can hopefully integrate that into kubectl upstream or Go client, wherever is the right place. But then that functionality is going to be available out there. And that's the same thing we're going to take and implement in our product as well. And you're going to use the same source code. So definitely the mentality. We also need to realize Amazon is a big ship. So it takes a while to change that mentality. So we are taking one step at a time. But I mean, that's the charter of our team essentially, to change that perspective. And I think I would really recommend to go visit opensource.amazon.com. That's the right website, right?
Yes.
So take a look at that website. We talk about all our open source activities. We have a brand new blog. We have a Twitter handle. Lots of ways by which we're gonna be working with our partners on how and where the open source activities are happening. So we highly encourage to get your feedback on that.
Right, and we're just kind of the voice externally. So, as a company, there are a whole bunch of champions inside. There's teams that have been involved in all of the compliance and all of the releasing of the code over the years as well, and all the engineers. So, we're part of the change that we're bringing about is really infusing the rest of the organization with open source, but a lot of that already exists, and it's also giving them a voice.
So to give you another example, this morning, like on the AWS, the Kubernetes workshop, somebody posted an issue, are you going to post contributor guideline? On how can I contribute, what can I contribute? I don't want to make up a contributor guideline. So that's when we went to the internal champion, Zahida, myself, and that internal champion, his name is Henry Yandel. Three of us discussed, what is the AWS philosophy? Because we're doing a lot of things that have never been done in Amazon's history. We are talking about it internally, but we make sure we are all well aligned, and then we put it out in the public, because then we are setting a precedence. And then again, that's not like casted in stone. If things need to evolve based upon, again, as Zahida said, customer obsession, that's the key part.
My question is about open source in general. So I think so it was also related to the landscape or CNCF and landscape diagram. So you have so many open source components there, and you have also these rectangles around these boxes, this framework. So this means they answer some specific domains, so to say, messaging or whatever. And the last 10 years, or I don't know, 15 years, I'm always comparing this framework. So which framework to take, it for which purpose, and so on and so forth. And they change over time. So for example, now with containers, the last thing that we were evaluating was, for example, should we take Kubernetes or should we take Docker Swarm? Okay, this decision is now done. Okay, fine. But I think this is a general problem. For example, 10 years ago it was, and for example, yeah, maybe not, but okay. Okay, maybe 10 years ago it was then, for example, JBuilder or Eclipse or whatever. So these were very old things. So the question is also, you also said 3 years ago, I think for Amazon, Kubernetes was not mature enough or was not decided, was not ready, something like that or so. And the question is there any, maybe from CNCF or so, is there any support? Or you were also asking for which framework can work which together. So there you have something, a blueprint, which frameworks can work together with which. So this would help, I think, all the other companies how to plug the things together. So maybe it goes more to CNCF or so, but maybe also to Amazon. You said open source, you have to also this discussion. Maybe question to all.
Yeah, I mean, that landscape diagram is really just more of a map, not necessarily like, here's a stack you could download and immediately use and play. It's a set of kind of recommendations for different types of projects in different spaces. We really have the mindset that, CNCF serves its projects, and you're not going to download like a cloud native distro from our website, right? We rely on our members to actually build products and sell them to people that will actually pay money and for them, because they actually derive some value from it. So our goal is to continually update that thing as much as possible. Once a month at least, do kind of a refresher and kind of constantly listen to our community to evolve that properly. Hopefully, I don't know if that answers your specific.
So to give an Amazon angle to that, again, I'm going to go back to the workshop because that's what has been keeping me busy for the last 4 months. We looked at how our customers want to do monitoring with Kubernetes. Now there are like 7 different ways you can do that. But what we did is we picked up 3 ways, but we're seeing the most prominent one. But if you think the 4th one matters to you, send us a pull request. And that's how we are looking at it. Now, similarly, if you're looking at app scaling, there are like multiple ways by which you can do app scaling. Should I use as a horizontal pod autoscaler? Should I use as CloudWatch metrics? Should I use as some other metrics? How do I do that? So there are lots of ways, I think, and the point is right, that it's really a map. And Amazon is a lot about customer choice. We give you choices, see what fits your need, and hopefully this workshop and other such material, we got lots of reference architecture, for example, for ECS. Like you want to build a pipeline. Sure, you have Jenkins in your environment, use Jenkins. You want to have nothing in your environment, use CodeStar's suite of tools. So from Amazon, absolutely we care about that, and we want to provide guidance to our customers in the best possible way.
Yeah,
I think we have time.
And just for the Swarm versus Kubernetes question, if you got money, in Docker EE, you can run both.
Well, that was a long time coming anyway. Thank you. But I think we are out of time here already. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. I hope you had a good time. Thanks.